Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto this week, a federal ban on all hemp products with THC? That's what's on the floor of Congress now as prohibitionists gather momentum towards blowing up the billion-dollar hemp industry that they created with the 2018 Farm Bill.
It means that we're pushing hemp-derived THC products into the underground market further rather than regulating these products, which is what needs to happen.
Plus, North Carolina Governor Josh Stein decides that moving forward with cannabis legalization makes revenue sense for his state while tax dollars fuel political movement. And with more Americans using cannabis now than ever before, it's the silver seniors who are leading this green wave with an over 40% increase in usage from that group. And another California legislative committee votes unanimously to block that controversial tax increase scheduled for July 1st. Plus, Whoopi Goldberg makes a stop at the annual Cannabis Means Business Conference in New York City as the keynote interview with CNBC's Tim Seymour at the Javits Center.
But I'm not here to please everybody. I'm just here to make offerings and say, here are some things that I'm into. Check them out if you want to.
Meanwhile, up the road in Northampton, Massachusetts, it was the third annual Flower Expo, where that popular trade show may have found a permanent home in that progressive city.
We love Northampton. It's just really an incredible new town that we're in, and the venue is great.
All that and international news, plus coast-to-coast cannabis news coverage on Cannabis Coast to Coast News with Alaina Pinto, next.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's production of the Fight to End Cannabis Prohibition. I'm Alaina Pinto. Here's our weekly plea for you to download our app that is available on Google Play and the App Store. You can just scan the QR code on the screen to connect and then search PCM space TV, and you will get access to the most important cannabis reform stories over the past 4 years. Okay, first up, all eyes continue to be focused on Washington, D.C. and Congress, and now it's the debate on the president's budget bill. A House subcommittee led by prohibitionist Andy Harris, a Republican Maryland congressman. He proposed an amendment to the budget bill that would ban THC-infused products at the federal level. That passed by a 7-5 partisan vote, and that amendment proposal now moves on to the Appropriations Committee before it can advance to the House floor for debate. This amendment basically recreates prohibition of a product that was created by the 2018 Farm Bill and gives hemp a new definition. If this happens, infused beverages, hemp and THCA products that have fueled a billion-dollar unregulated industry will be shut down. The National Cannabis Industry Association, one of the leading lobby groups in our nation's capital for cannabinoid products, they responded with a simple plea. Regulation, yes. Prohibition, no. Here's their executive director, Aaron Smith, with more.
So, Aaron, why don't you take this second, please, and tell the people what you said in your release and why this is a very scary development in the reform world.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we've got the big, beautiful budget bill under consideration on the House side right now, and a subcommittee in the appropriations House Appropriations Committee, led by Andy Harris, by the way, who's a congressman from Maryland, who has kind of made cannabis prohibition one of his cause celebs, which I think he's probably the only one left in Congress doing that. He's introduced an amendment or a provision in the bill that would redefine hemp as saying it has to not have any quantifiable amount of THC. So what that means is anything, which it's hard to even say what that means because there's, you can buy cereal at Whole Foods that has some quantifiable amount of THC. But practically the real concern is that it means that we're pushing hemp-derived THC products into the underground market further rather than regulating these products, which is what needs to happen. So, this is trying to hand a big win over to the drug cartels instead of small businesses that should be able to to responsibly distribute these products.
Aaron joins our executive producer, Jimmy Young, every week on the NCIA's Voice of Cannabis podcast that is presented by Buds Group Consultants in the tri-state area. And if you haven't checked it out or downloaded the last one, Aaron and Jimmy have a great conversation with Dina Titus, the Congresswoman co-sponsor on the States Act 2.0 that outlines a pathway towards federal legalization for the cannabis sativa plant. In the meantime, sales continue and merger and acquisitions continue as well, and business and networking events continue to be held as the industry faces one of its biggest challenges since reform began over 12 years ago. We've already heard the response on the proposed THC hemp ban from the NCIA, so now let's check in with our hemp reporter with the latest from Texas, another hemp battlefield. Our hemp guy is Kerry Hinkle, and he's also a new dad. Congratulations, Kerry. Here he is.
Hi, everyone. This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and this is your hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, Congressman Andy Harris, a longtime critic of both marijuana and hemp-derived THC, has once again taken aim at our industry. He is the chairman of the House Agriculture Appropriations Subcommittee, in a powerful position known in D.C. as a cardinal. Congressman Harris has once again inserted language into his federal budget proposal that would ban all hemp products that contain any amount of THC. This includes controversial products like THCA flower or Delta 8, but it also includes non-controversial products like a full-spectrum CBD tincture that a little old lady might use to help her get through her day. Now, this isn't the first attempt at banning or restricting hemp products at the federal level in the last few years. Last year, a similar amendment was added by Congresswoman Mary Miller from Illinois into the House version of the Farm Bill, which would have had a similar impact in that it banned all products that contained any quantifiable amount of THC. Now, give Congressman Harris a little bit of credit. His language is a little tighter in that it allows HHS to work with the USDA to define what those quantifiable levels of THC means. So this gives the federal government a little bit more wiggle room in this definition. And it also specifically calls out industrial hemp, saying that rope and other industrial uses of the hemp crop are not impacted by this language. Now, farmers of hemp will push back. It is impossible to grow the crop without some amounts of THC. So we as an industry still feel that this is quite detrimental to the industrial side of the industry. Now, one saving grace is these agriculture appropriations bills have not passed in several years. For over a decade now, Congress has relied on temporary spending bills or continuing resolutions, often called CRs, to continue funding without more controversial aspects to be added to the spending bill. So it has now left the subcommittee on a 9-7 vote. And if it does make it to the full House, there are plenty of time to change and advocate for amendments in that agriculture appropriations bill specific to hemp. And then if it made it all the way over to the Senate and their Senate committee and then the full Senate, there's a lot of steps in this process before this would ever become law. So we are monitoring and watching as this bill moves forward. But if past indications and failed attempts to ban our industry at the federal level are anything to lean on, we feel confident that this will not go anywhere, but still important to track. Again, I'm Kerry Hinkle. This was my hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We'll see you next week.
Our federal cannabis reform reporter is Andrew Behringer, and he has more on what is going on with the president's spending bill that now could be the vehicle that could eliminate the hot hemp and THC-infused beverage industry.
I'm Andrew Behringer with the Washington, D.C. report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. For the second time in his presidency, Donald Trump is proposing to eliminate federal protections that prevent the Justice Department from interfering with state medical cannabis programs. This move comes as a surprise to industry stakeholders who supported Trump based on his campaign endorsements of cannabis rescheduling, banking reform, and even Florida's adult use cannabis ballot initiative last year. The budget request seeks to remove a congressional rider that has protected state medical cannabis laws since 2014, a protection that Congress has consistently maintained regardless of which president requested its removal. During his first term, Trump made similar requests annually and even issued statements suggesting he might ignore the protections, citing this constitutional duty to faithfully execute federal laws. Now, cannabis advocates are particularly frustrated given Trump's campaign rhetoric. There's a significant disconnect between what was promised on the campaign trail and what we're seeing in this budget, says one industry representative. The president had previously endorsed rescheduling cannabis and expanding banking access for cannabis businesses. The budget also maintains restrictions preventing Washington, D.C. from using local taxpayer funds to implement adult use cannabis sales. Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton continues her fight against this provision, while the White House recently called D.C.'s cannabis reforms a failed policy that opened the door to disorder. Adding to the complexity is Trump's nominee for DEA Administrator Terrence Cole, who has expressed concerns about cannabis's dangers, but calls the ongoing rescheduling review as first priority if confirmed. Now, Cole refuses to commit to any specific outcome, saying he'll consult with the DEA personnel, but before making decisions, interestingly enough, targeting medical cannabis protections, and Trump's budget continues to protect state hemp programs, a contradiction that highlights the administration's selective approach to cannabis policy. Congress is expected to reject Trump's request to eliminate medical cannabis protections, maintaining the bipartisan support that these measures have enjoyed for over a decade. However, this proposal creates uncertainty for the state programs and patients who rely on medical cannabis access. The ultimate direction of federal cannabis policy will likely depend on congressional action and the ongoing rescheduling review process initiated under the Biden administration. But for now, cannabis advocates are left wondering whether the campaign promises will translate into actual reform. Well, that's the Washington, D.C. report. I'm Andrew Behringer, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The race to become the 25th adult use legal state in the United States continues and now has a surprising new contestant. It's North Carolina. This is another state with a vibrant THC-infused hemp market, but some of the most strict prohibition laws in the country. Their governor, Josh Stein, went on record with an executive order covering the North Carolina Advisory Council on Cannabis. There will be 30 members, including lawmakers, law enforcement leaders, agricultural stakeholders, health and medical experts, trial representatives, and industry advocates to explore possible regulatory models for adult use guidelines for both sides of this plant medicine. Now let's check in with Michigan to see what's going on in that state with Amie Carter.
I'm Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters, bringing you this week's Michigan report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Michigan lawmakers are still eyeing bills to allow roadside saliva testing for THC, raising eyebrows amongst experts. Critics warn of a 25% error rate from past tests and that THC presence doesn't prove impairment, leading to fears of unjust arrests. Over on the west side, a popular Niles restaurant is leaving for Indiana, paving the way for a new Happy Days dispensary. A Michigan resident and long-term green card holder found himself in federal custody for almost 2 months due to an older cannabis possession charge. This occurred despite his legal marriage to a U.S. citizen and raising 3 children in Ypsilanti. Interestingly, he and his wife previously supported Donald Trump, who prioritized immigration enforcement in his campaign and policies. Iosco County, Michigan, police found over 5,000 cannabis plants worth $5 million at an illegal grow operation in Iosco County. 4 Chinese nationals face charges linked to an international crime ring. A Michigan Marine Corps spouse just dodged serious time after attempting to sneak liquid cannabis into Japan using toy boxes as her cover. Originally handed a 2-year prison sentence, with hard labor, she managed to escape incarceration by demonstrating remorse and having a clean slate. As much as 30% of cannabis in Michigan fails safety testing at first, but much of it gets remediated and sold without any disclosure about its moldy past. Despite protests from the industry, state regulators continue to turn a blind eye to calls for increased transparency, according to MLive. That is it for this week. I am Amie Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is a bizarre story out of Maryland this week. Someone hacked into a Google Maps account and created a phony posting for an adult use cannabis dispensary in a quiet neighborhood. And needless to say, it was a surprise for people who showed up looking for it, while the homeowners dealt with the unexpected and unwanted attention. Here's Christopher Bright in Maryland.
Hey, how you doing? I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightening Voice. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'll be bringing you the latest cannabis headlines from Maryland. Governor Wes Moore has announced a new round of funding through the Maryland Department of Commerce Cannabis Business Assistance Fund, marking the fourth initiative to support small businesses and entrepreneurs in Maryland's adult use cannabis industry. The governor expressed pride in diversifying the sector, stating that this effort enhances equity and economic growth, delivering benefits across the entire state. The grant targets new social equity cannabis businesses licensees that were selected last year via the Maryland Cannabis Administration lottery system. Over 200 applicants were chosen, including micro and standard growers, processors, and dispensaries. Maryland's Commerce Secretary Harry Coker Jr. emphasized the fund's role in invigorating small, minority, and women-owned businesses, creating more opportunities in this growing industry. Maryland Cannabis Industry Director Tabitha Robinson noted the funds support key expenses like employee training, equipment, and payroll. The program has already awarded over $45 million to help new entrants with startup funding, leveling the playing field for social equity entrepreneurs, according to Audrey Johnson, Executive Director of the Maryland Office of Social Equity. And now we have our content creator of the week. I would like to shine a spotlight on Olga Hall, aka The Plant Nurse. Her IG at The Plant Nurse is a plethora of information to learn from cannabis and mushroom information to her services as the lowest price cannabis certification provider, or it's just as a nurse practitioner. I just were certified for myself for $45. Please give her a follow and be sure to schedule a consultation for all your cannabis health needs. And that's all for this week's Maryland Cannabis Report. I'm Christopher Bright from the Enlightening Voice reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
There is still an impending deadline for July 1st for another tax hike on the California cannabis industry. In 2022, Governor Gavin Newsom used his executive powers to implement an emergency increase when the industry did not reach projected revenue and tax goals. But now at 15%, it's supposed to go up to 19% by that July 1st date. This week, the California Assembly, a group of 80 elected officials in the lower house of the legislative branch of that state, has voted unanimously to stop that tax increase. The state eliminated the cultivation tax in 2022, so that impacted the tax totals collected, and now the governor wants to make it up by increasing total taxes on the industry. Needless to say, this did not go over well in his state, and now his own legislature is resisting his solution to this tax discrepancy. Of course, it hasn't helped that first quarter legal sales have decreased in California to their lowest point since 2020. With more from California, here's Dina Naguib.
I'm Dina Naguib, Principal Consultant at Grass Goddess Consulting, here to give you the latest developments in California for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First off, AB 564 swept the Assembly floor with a vote of 74-0. The bill will block the excise tax increase from 15% to 19%, which has been set to happen on July 1st. But is it a little too late? At this point, the bill won't take effect until the start of next year, and the excise tax will still increase in July. There is a way to incorporate it into the budget trailer bill so that the increase doesn't happen, and it's important that Californians stay vigilant and let Sacramento know that this is critical for our industry. But let's also not forget to celebrate good news, because a landslide vote means that our voices are being heard. Stay tuned. In other news, legal cannabis sales in California experienced an 11% decline during the first quarter of this year, which is the largest decline in the history of legal sales in this state. This is in a large part due to overtaxation, which has caused the majority of sales to occur outside of the legal market, according to the Department of Cannabis Control. Hopefully, with AB 564 in place, the industry can figure out how to take back the majority of sales and become what we all hope legalization would look like. That's it for California News. I'm Dina Naguib with Grass Goddess Consulting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That'll do it for the A block or first section of our weekly Cannabis Coast to Coast news show. Coming up next, our international news segment with new countries moving towards reform. And later on PCM TV, founder Jimmy Young spent a few days in Western Massachusetts at the 3rd annual Flower Expo, one of the most popular pro-cannabis business trade shows and networking events every year in the Northeast and now expanding into the Midwest. Cannabis Coast to Coast news continues after this.
Counting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.